Did everyone here remember that Hogwarts Legacy came out this year? The first major release of 2023 was one that had been anticipated for years, one that finally took the potential of the Harry Potter world seriously, and one that gave fans across the globe the chance to live out their fantasy of attending Hogwarts as their very own witch or wizard. It released to very favorable reviews, broke streaming records for viewership, and will likely end up as the best-selling game of the entire year. All in all, this was a title with a tremendous amount of hype surrounding it, and for the most part, it actually lived up to it. And there's a chance that when all is said and done, Hogwarts Legacy might not even make the list of nominations for some people's Game of the Year. How is that possible? Well, it's possible because 2023 has been, is currently, and will continue to be a remarkable year for gaming. I think by now most people have recognized this fact, but I'm not sure the magnitude of it has really sunk in yet. The most common narrative I've heard in gaming circles this year is excited but almost lighthearted and joking in nature. It's more of a, haha, what am I gonna spend my money on, rather than a, holy shit, this is an absolute top tier 12-month span of game releases. To name just a few highlights, 2023 is a year we've seen mainline entries into some of gaming's most blue blood series, like Zelda, Final Fantasy, and Diablo. We've witnessed a resurrection of classic titles breaking back into the scene with new installments of Baldur's Gate and Armored Core. And we've been treated to yet another strong showing for independent developers with sleeper hits like Dredge and Pizza Tower. 2023 is a year that had two of its most hotly anticipated titles crash and burn, and not only did it survive the fallout, but it continues to thrive throughout it. To put it frankly, what we're witnessing this year is nothing short of historic. What does that mean, really? Well, first, just for fun, let's take a look at some data real quick. I compiled review scores on Metacritic from the past decade of gaming, using the top 10 highest rated games each year and averaging their total. There are, without a doubt, many ways to measure the success of any given year. This just happens to be the one I went with. There's nothing special about this method, but it does give us enough data to highlight some major standouts. Over this time period, the year with the highest average score of its top 10 games has been 2018. Spearheaded by two of the heaviest hitting AAA titles from the entire last generation, as well as one of the most well-respected indie games of all time, 2018 landed a very impressive score of 92.4. And here's how the rest of the years shake out. So the question is, where does 2023 land on this list? And the answer is right near the top, in the 2 spot. That's really impressive. So not only is this year on track to just narrowly trail a monster year for critically acclaimed games in 2018, but this score would also put it 0.2 of a point above 2017, the year that brought us Breath of the Wild, Mario Odyssey, Divinity Original Sin 2, Prey, Cuphead, Persona 5, and yeah, I think that's it, right? I'm not missing anything. 2017 to 2018 was an absolute bonkers time period for gaming, and 2023 is currently tracking to be riding right alongside them. The pace at which great games have been releasing left and right has been seemingly non-stop this past year, and we're not even close to being done. There are several noteworthy games yet to be released that have the potential to add to this year's spoil of riches, and even strengthen its case as one of the top years in gaming ever. Okay, so data like this is fun to look at, and it can certainly show us trends, but at the end of the day, I don't put too much stock into aggregate review scores. They can be really all over the place, it's not uncommon for them to not age very well, and to be honest, sometimes I just flat out disagree with them. For example, the aforementioned Prey, a triumph of an immersive sim, was the 101st highest rated game of 2017. What? And if you're curious, the definitely not aforementioned Hollow Knight was 37th, 8 spots behind something called Nex Machina Death Machine. Alright, fortunately for us though, the impact that this year has had on gaming goes beyond how well received many of its titles have been. They've also helped to solidify trends, created significant cultural moments, and continued to be a breeding ground for creativity and innovation. So qualitatively, here are just some of the things that the current state of gaming has taught us in 2023. Big budget publishers and many of the games they've released have received a lot of flack in recent years, and rightfully so. Titles that are terribly formulaic and stale, releases that are broken, buggy, and incomplete, and of course monetization models that are incessant and predatory, have all eroded the gaming community's faith in both the business and development of games. We're still seeing all of these things happen in 2023, and there are, unfortunately, no signs of them slowing down. But what we've also seen is that in the right hands, AAA titles truly can live up to their AAA name. There was little doubt that The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom was going to be a high-quality game. Nintendo rarely misses on the mainline entries into its most revered series, but that doesn't mean that there weren't questions leading up to its release. Namely, what was it going to do differently? Breath of the Wild flipped the Zelda series on its head in 2017 with its implementation of an enormous and stunning open world, which certainly allowed for a more non-linear approach in gameplay, but more impactful was the way this design resulted in one of the most memorable experiences in unbridled exploration we've ever seen in gaming. This is what Breath of the Wild is remembered for, and with Tears of the Kingdom being a direct sequel on the same hardware, using the same style of world and gameplay, and looking basically identical to its predecessor, it wasn't unreasonable to wonder what was going to make this game stand out. But just like Majora's Mask twisted and turned the Ocarina of Time formula into something entirely fresh, Tears of the Kingdom built on Breath of the Wild's template, literally, with its massive expansion of its crafting and building system. The result was gameplay that felt new, sure, but it also led to a cultural movement of people using the game to build some of the most inventive creations imaginable, something that even 5 years ago we would have never expected to see in a Zelda game. In an era in which publishers are all too happy to release sequels upon sequels with little to no innovation year after year, Nintendo consistently makes a point to not release a game unless it feels confident that it's bringing something new to the table. Baldur's Gate 3, meanwhile, comes from Larian Studios, a wholly independent developer, but you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who didn't consider this game to be a true AAA release. And the response to this long-anticipated title has been overwhelmingly positive, even surpassing review scores collected by Tears of the Kingdom. Baldur's Gate 3 is by all measurements a fantastic game, but its true legacy might be the way it flies in the face of typical big studio releases, challenging and denying everything that audiences despise about the modern business of gaming. Despite the game's long development process, it was released at a $60 price point, bucking the trend of $70 releases that have become the new norm in the industry. More importantly though, it contains 0 microtransactions, and Larian has openly commented on their position against such practices. It also went through a long open testing period that seems to have genuinely taken feedback and data from players to enhance the final product. It is a full game with an enormous amount of content. There are reports of bugs popping up later in the game, but Larian is already at work correcting these and have gained enough goodwill from their community that there's little doubt they'll actually succeed in this process. This game single-handedly sparked conversations about what gamers can and should legitimately expect from game releases and the companies behind them. And people can point to Baldur's Gate 3 being an anomaly, they can say that other developers don't care about the conversations calling them out, or that they won't be impacted by the way the gaming community has rallied around Baldur's Gate. Fine. But the people who play the games, they notice these things, and the undeniable success of Baldur's Gate 3 is a huge step in the right direction. So in a year full of really good AAA games, 2 of its flagships have shown us once again that quality studios still make quality games when they care enough. And I truthfully thought that this entire argument might come crashing down when Starfield released in an inevitably busted state. But early reports of Bethesda's Epic are actually astonished at how few bugs and crashes are present at launch. So you go, 2023. While AAA studios have been stumbling, manipulating, and sometimes outright lying the past several years, independent developers have been hard at work picking up the slack. We've seen an incredible number of top-tier, must-play indie titles in recent memory, and 2023 seems like no exception to that trend. Comparatively, this past year has actually been a bit of a lower profile time for indie developers, but what we've lacked in quantity of major releases has been outgained by seeing these games absolutely shine at what they do best, introducing unique concepts, settings, and ways of playing in tight packages. And as usual, there's no one box you can fit all these games into. Dave the Diver briefly took the gaming world by storm for its concise blending of multiple genres into a captivating experience. Cassette Beasts finally gave us a new take on a Pokemon-inspired game that was actually worth paying attention to. Dredge is every single person's nominee for gaming genre I didn't know I needed, and the fantastically outlandish Pizza Tower helped spearhead the sudden revival of Wario-likes, a term that I don't think anyone had on their gaming bingo card as we entered the 2020s. And as always, there are dozens of other indie titles out there that have likely flown under the radar, waiting for their chance to pop in and dazzle us. This seemingly constant source of innovation and fresh ideas has always been a mainstay in indie gaming. As larger publishers play it more and more safe each year, the industry has relied on indie studios to push the medium forward in new and exciting and weird and wacky ways. So this occurrence is nothing new. But what happens when a high-profile publisher dips its toes in these waters, releasing a game that genuinely makes you stop in your tracks because of just how refreshing it looks and feels? Well, we found out the exact answer to that question earlier this year with the surprise release of Hi-Fi Rush. Playing Hi-Fi Rush is a truly revitalizing experience. Developed by Tango Gameworks and published by Bethesda, this game turned out to be one of the most unexpected but most celebrated titles this year because of its willingness to be different. Featuring an outstanding cartoon-like art style, fast and fluid rhythm-based combat, and a vibrant world that shakes, rattles, and rolls with every beat, there is simply nothing out there right now quite like Hi-Fi Rush. And if this game was just a combination of unique ideas and styles, it might not have gathered the attention that it did. But that's not all it is, because everything it tries and everything it gambles on comes together into an amazingly focused experience. And in a game designed to make you feel good, perhaps what's most inspiring is that Hi-Fi Rush is proof positive that innovative, fresh, and inventive ideas can come from anywhere, including studios that have the backing of big boy publishers. Mainstream annual releases that use new campaigns or fresh settings to reach the bare minimum of progress are still going to be a major part of this industry. But it was an incredibly welcome sight to see that's not the only thing the major players are capable of. And when they're willing to give a talented studio the opportunity to take a chance on something unique, sometimes it can result in something as special as Hi-Fi Rush and remind us all of the childlike joy that got us into gaming in the first place. I mentioned several noteworthy indie games a minute ago, but perhaps the biggest indie release of the year has come in the form of the long-awaited love letter to classic RPGs, Sea of Stars. If you've been following the development of Sea of Stars at all, you know that it is painstakingly accurate in the way it acknowledges its influences, but also wisely evolves from those games, bringing the retro RPG formula to life with an almost obsessive level of care. Pulling from classic RPGs like Chrono Trigger, Secret of Mana, and the other genre-defining games of that era, Sea of Stars gathers all the ingredients that worked in those titles, adds its own engaging wrinkles, and blends them into a superbly polished game that's accessible to modern audiences. It is an easy contender for Indie Game of the Year, and it gets there by perfecting the process of identifying what we remember older games to be like, and then creating an experience that actually delivers on those memories. We should note, though, that while Sea of Stars successfully cracked the code on reinventing what used to be old, it's certainly not the only application of that process that we've seen this year. The 2023 remake of Dead Space surprised absolutely no one by being a good game. The 2008 original still holds up and is perfectly playable even today, so when this re-release was first announced, I know I was not the only person thinking, does this need to be a thing? And while not as egregious as the PlayStation 5 version of The Last of Us, a game that was released only 9 years prior and also already received a first attempt at a remaster, Dead Space still fell squarely into that category of games that felt like unnecessary money grabs that banked on recent nostalgia for sales. And don't get me wrong, it absolutely is that. But it also turned out to just be a cool freaking game made even cooler with modern visuals and design tweaks. What was already considered to be one of the best survival horror games of all time had now been transformed into a definitive action horror experience that could not be surpassed. Until it was. 2 months later. Dead Space does not exist without Resident Evil 4, and in March of 2023, the landmark survival horror series reminded us who the king of the genre is when the Resident Evil 4 remake was released to universal acclaim. Reviewers and fans alike were enamored with this title, as it brought an already all-time great into the modern era of gaming and proved once again that what isn't broke doesn't always need to be fixed, it just needs a little touch-up now and again. The 1-2 punch of Dead Space and Resident Evil 4 in 2023 cemented the era of remakes as a legitimate movement in gaming. While I personally still give more attention to full remakes like those we saw in Final Fantasy VII or Resident Evil 2, there is unquestionably still a space for these modern versions of well-remembered games. And as long as they are well made, as both Dead Space and Resident Evil 4 are, then I'm all for this movement. But that's not all 2023 had to say about these games, because in another Hogwarts Legacy moment, how many of you remembered that the Metroid Prime remaster was also released this year? And much like the reworking of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater that we saw a couple years ago, Metroid Prime was a game that I could legitimately get behind being brought up to speed for this generation of gamers. So overall, just an astoundingly impressive year for modernizing classic games with a tremendous sense of care and passion for the projects. Even if this year's current flood of games was shut off today, this would already be a fantastic year for the industry. But believe it or not, there's still a lot more to come. 2023's third flagship title, Starfield, releases this week. And while it's reasonable to be cautious about Bethesda's new IP out of the gate, early review scores have been positive, and there's no doubt that culturally, Starfield is already one of the biggest games of the year. Nintendo surprise announced the 2023 releases of both Super Mario Bros. Wonder and the re-release of Super Mario RPG, giving us a solid representation of our head video game mascot in a year we didn't necessarily expect it. The recent Spiderman games have been some of the most solid superhero games we've seen, and so far there's no reason to expect any different when Spider-Man 2 comes out this October. Cocoon is an indie title that has huge sleeper potential, an intriguing puzzler coming from the lead gameplay designer behind Limbo and Inside. And there's plenty of other big-name titles yet to be released that might not be surefire hits, but most of them certainly seem to be trending in a positive direction. By any metric you choose to use, 2023 has been a phenomenal year for gaming. So when assessing it, you really have to consider what you value the most. Is it critically acclaimed instant classics at the top of the class? Got it. A steady stream of great games throughout the course of the whole year? Got that too. Are innovation and fresh ideas important components to your favorite types of games? No problem. Or maybe you measure a year's success by the sheer quantity of impressive titles it stakes claim to. Present and accounted for. Earlier this year, I released a video that highlighted what I thought was one of the best years that indie gaming has ever seen. And in that video, there's kind of a running joke about 1998 being the greatest year for video game releases ever. That year is one of a handful that seems to always show their faces when this type of discussion comes up, and each one of those years is deserving of being recognized for their own respective reasons. We will never come to a consensus on which one truly comes out on top, nor should we. But one thing is for certain, after the clock strikes 12 on December 31st later this year, there won't exist a discussion of the best years in gaming history that doesn't now include 2023 among that list of all-time greats. Hey, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this one. Videos like this I make mostly just for fun, as a change up to the usual type of content I put out, so I hope you had fun watching this, and please don't take anyone's opinion on the games you love too seriously. If I happen to miss any of your favorite games from this year so far, feel free to let me know in the comments. Like this video if you agree that 2023 has been an amazing year for gaming, and subscribe if you're just happy that I mentioned Hollow Knight.